Make a start. Welcome to the Education Committee meeting of the 27th of January 2015, obviously the first one in the new year. As usual, we note that the meeting will be recorded and subsequently made available to the public for listening purposes. So do you have any apologies? Sederunt, any apologies?
Thank you, Chairman. We have apologies from Ronnie Nicholson, the Reverend McFadden, and Mr. Robert Pritchley Simpson. Thank you.
And do you have any declarations of interest? Okay, so we move to item 3, the minute of the meeting of 25th of November 2015. Can we agree it's a true record of the meeting? 14. Sorry?
When we presented the annual performance report to members in September, members asked that Audit Scotland be invited to present their report and findings to and related to Dumfries and Galloway. So I'm very pleased to introduce Sarah Pollock and Kirsty White from Audit Scotland, who will be giving us a presentation, and then I'm happy to take questions as to how that impacts on our work.
Good morning. I think we're just going to view the presentation in this format just for technical reasons. Good morning, and thank you very much for affording us the opportunity to come this morning to talk about this report that we published in June last year. So just to give you a little bit of context about the report, this was the first time that Audit Scotland had actually looked at school education in quite a number of years. Previous work that we had done was on the Macron Agreement, or the Teachers' Agreement, and we published a report in 2005, and we've also done some work on school estates. But given the amount of money that is spent on school education in Scotland and the fact that nobody had really looked at it in quite a significant amount of time, we felt it was appropriate for us to do some work in this area. I mean, the investment, just to give you that overview, per annum in primary and secondary school education in Scotland is 3.7 billion. So in local government terms, it's actually very substantial. Obviously, as well, there's changes to the exam system in 2014 that came into being in Scotland, and we felt it was a good opportunity to look over the course of the last decade and really be able to benchmark performance during this period. So the report that we presented in June 2004 really provides an overview of primary and secondary school sector, and there's lots of potential issues that came out of this work, and I think we'll be considering what other audit work might be appropriate for us moving forward. Just very briefly, to give you an overview of the aims and objective of the audit, the overall aim was to assess how efficiently and effectively councils were using resources to maximise pupil achievement in schools. I think given the emphasis of curriculum for excellence in the wider learning context, we were also keen to understand what is happening in relation to wider achievement and not just have a very narrow focus on attainment, exam performance. So it was a high-level look at primary and secondary education in Scotland. We obviously couldn't look at every area in a lot of detail, and I think one of the purposes of our work was to identify future audit work and also help inform perhaps other work colleagues within Education Scotland might take forward in the future. So in terms of the scope of the audit, we didn't actually look at progress, formal progress, in the rollout of the Scottish Government's Curriculum for Excellence, and we didn't look at special schools, preschool, further higher education and non-council schools. The focus was very much primary and secondary education. I'm now going to hand on to Kirsty, who is just going to talk a bit more about attainment.
Good morning. As Sarah mentioned, I'm just going to talk you a bit more through the attainment side of things, some national figures, those relevant to Dumfries and Galloway, a little bit about spend, and then I'll hand back over to Sarah to talk through more on the financial context. So in terms of the slide that's up, this is really our selection of sort of some pertinent facts nationally about where Scotland sits in terms of education and attainment. I think the standout one is probably the second bullet. And what that means is there was a school in Scotland in 2013 where no pupils in S4 achieved 5 credit level standard grades, and there was a school in Scotland where 81% of pupils did. So there really is a wide spread of performance across the country in terms of attainment. Deprivation, as you'll be aware, it continues to play quite a significant part in how well pupils learn, but I'll come on and talk about the impact of that a little bit more in a minute. Just to say the next few slides, while they focus on attainment, we did look at wider achievement in the report, and that's obviously a really important part in terms of the new curriculum for excellence. So just in terms of time constraints, I'm not going to talk about it particularly, but very happy to take questions on it. So just in terms of attainment trends, this shows Dumfries and Galloway's position over the past 10 years. And from the papers that come to committee, it's not going to be a surprise to you. We picked 10 measures to look at in the audit. Those were the 10 most commonly reported across the country to council committees. Now, as Sarah mentioned, those have obviously changed. We've now got the 4 new national measures that have just been introduced, but this was a useful opportunity for us to benchmark what had gone on over the previous 10 years. So in terms of Dumfries and Galloway's position, it is a positive one. Dumfries and Galloway is one of the 14 councils that improved across all 10 measures in the past 10 years. And improvement rates have sat around the national average, although Dumfries started from a slightly higher position than the national average, attainments continued to go up. One thing we did that isn't in the report, a piece of analysis, we looked at councils comparatively to each other to see how they ranked against each other. And we looked at councils' position across the 10 measures in 2004, and we looked at them in 2013, and we looked at where councils had gone compared to other councils. Dumfries and Galloway in 2004 sat in the middle group of councils, that middle third performing councils, and actually over the past 10 years they've moved into the top third of performing councils. So that's a positive picture. What I would say is, there is no ceiling on improvements in attainment. East Dunbartonshire and East Renfrewshire, you'll probably know, are the top 2 performing authorities in the country. Now, there are a number of reasons for that, but they have continued to improve. They started at a high level, they've continued to improve over the past 10 years. So, there's no ceiling. There's no ceiling on improvement. The improvements can be made, but certainly from a Dumfries picture, it is a positive one over the past 10 years. The trends are going in the right direction. One thing we were keen to do, obviously a lot in the report we compare councils, but we were very interested to see what was going on within councils. And what that exhibit shows is the range and spread of school performance within councils. Now, apologies, it's not the easiest to read nor the most plain English. It was our best attempt. But what it shows is basically the top horizontal bar for each council is the highest performing school in 2013 in terms of the percentage of S4 pupils achieving 5 credit level awards. And the lower horizontal bar is the lowest performing school in each council. So what you can see is that there's a wide spread within the majority of councils in terms of what's going on. The exhibit's ordered from left to right in terms of the range of performance. Now, Dumfries and Galloway we've highlighted in the red rectangle. It does have quite a wide range in performance among its schools. It was 55% in 2013, and it was one of 4 councils out with the urban authorities that had a spread of higher than 50%. In terms of spread, though, it is more positive. That little sort of burgundy rectangle shows the performance of the majority of schools in a council area. So what you can see is that for Dumfries and Galloway, the majority of your schools are performing at the higher end of your attainment scale, and they're quite tightly clustered. So obviously, the smaller the rectangle, the better the consistency, which is good. Obviously, you can have great consistency, but be very low attaining, like, for example, Dundee, which down there. So I would obviously say consistency isn't necessarily a good thing in itself. It needs to be at the higher end of the scale. In terms of how that picture has changed over the past 10 years, the range in performance between the highest and lowest performing schools in Dumfries has increased. And it's increased because the rate at which your higher improving schools are improving is faster than those at which your lower improving schools are improving. That makes sense. So basically, your lower performing schools are improving, however, the higher performing schools are improving faster. So that it's not a position that's unique to Dumfries. It is a picture in the majority, actually, of councils across Scotland. This exhibit looks at, it's an attempt to look at the impact of deprivation. We heard throughout the audit, and you know, everybody is aware that deprivation continues to have quite a significant impact on how pupils learn across Scotland. But we were keen to try and understand how much of an impact deprivation actually had. So what we did was take, as a proxy measure for deprivation, the percentage of pupils eligible in each school for free school meals, and we mapped that against the percentage of S4 pupils in each school achieving 5 credit level standard grades. And this is what came out, which is a really interesting, picture. Obviously, what it shows is there is a link between deprivation and performance, but actually it's not as strong as you might think. Dumfries's high schools are in the red squares, and what obviously that shows is there are schools with similar levels of deprivation, but they are performing differently. So we are saying to councils, you know, it is important that councils understand what is creating those differences. There will be valid reasons, you know, why there will be differences, but equally there may not be so valid reasons, and it's important that councils and members themselves understand, you know, why are those schools performing differently? What might one school be doing that we can learn from that and improve performance in another school? Just to move on to expenditure, this is an exhibit that we had in the national report, and we've just tailored it for Dumfries and Galloway, but we've put the national averages down the right-hand side. So in 2012-13, Dumfries spent just over 122 million on primary and secondary education. Now, as you can see, the percentages, actually, the proportion of spend is roughly comparable to the national averages. Although every council has their particular circumstances, we recognise that, you know, rural authorities will spend more on school transport. They will have higher teacher costs per head, primarily because they're running rural schools and may have lower occupancy rates. So we're saying, you know, if the figures look slightly out of kilter with the national average, that's not something to be worried about. It's just important that authorities understand what are we spending our money on, why are we spending it, why does our spend per head look, say, high compared to other authorities, and what can we do to, you know, are there other ways that we can improve efficiency, or ways that we can share good practice. Benchmarking is obviously important. Local government benchmarking framework is in place for the past couple of years that authorities can use. So we would encourage authorities to benchmark their costs where they can against other councils, just to try and share that information and see where they can learn from. So I'm going to pass on to Sarah now, just to talk through a bit more about the financial climate and what's facing councils and where we go from here.
Okay, thank you, Kirsty. I mean, I think as we all know, education spending has been coming under pressure in recent years, and I mean, councils across Scotland have actually been seeking a kind of variety of ways to reduce expenditure, and we did a very detailed piece of work for this report looking at the budget papers and proposals going to councils across Scotland to try and look and understand all the ways that they were seeking to reduce education expenditure, and we did that over a sort of 3-year period. So obviously a lot of the focus, as Kirsty's pie chart highlighted to us, a lot of the expenditure within school education is on staffing, and clearly there has been a focus to reduce staffing In the last couple of years, we looked at a sort of 3-year period, and we have seen reductions of administrative and clerical staff across Scotland by 5%, and classroom assistants by 2%, and quality improvement officers by 22%. So clearly that has been an area of focus for councils. But I think what's interesting is that the other areas, if you look at the slide, that really have been a focus for councils in terms of reducing expenditure, I think there's a general feeling that no stone has been left unturned in reducing expenditure in the last few years, and this slide actually represents the ways that councils across Scotland have been seeking to reduce expenditure, and some of these I'm sure will be familiar to yourself, looking at things like reducing CPD programmes and training. We've got school transport and timetabling efficiency, making the school week more efficient. So there's a number of different approaches that councils have been taking. And interestingly, in the period that we looked at, councils have actually been making savings from changes to teachers' terms and conditions of service following the 2011 SNCT paying condition agreement for teachers. Now, this reduced annual leave for teachers on maternity and long-term sick and increased time in the classroom for probationary teachers. So that was an area that was quite a big focus in terms of being able to yield savings in the past few years. I think the question now, or the concern maybe, where do we go next? I mean, I think what's very interesting, and you have a later paper coming on this, the work that you're doing on the structural delivery 2 to 18 service review. I mean, that's probably the next stage of the process that you're in, around how you enable staff to facilitate the very best opportunities for learners and families with a reducing pot of money. And it's interesting, to see how you're taking that work forward. Spending and attainment, just looking ahead, I think, as I pointed out, obviously it's going to continue to come under pressure. I think there's some specific challenges as well within the education sector. I mean, we didn't look at this area in a lot of detail, but what came through to us in report is that there is, challenges meeting the requirements of pupils with additional support needs in special schools and classes in mainstream schools. It wasn't a specific focus of the work in this audit, but discussions and feedback from councils identified that as being quite a financial challenge moving forward. There remains the public and political opposition to closing schools, which may mean that often councils are unable to achieve the financial savings that closures could potentially bring. And then there's that residual issue of maintaining and upgrading the school estate. Now, significant progress has been made across Scotland in recent years, but the last figures from Scottish Government indicated that 18% of schools in Scotland still remain in what we call Category C, which is poor or bad condition. We did an analysis as well as part of this report of spend and attainment, which is quite interesting, and this actually showed no direct correlation between the two. So essentially, continuing to spend large amounts of money doesn't necessarily give you improved educational attainment, and this interestingly fits with much of the academic literature and other studies nationally and worldwide that are available. It certainly doesn't mean that we are advocating reducing spending. I think our message from that is it's much more about how you use the resources that you do have in a very targeted manner, but importantly with a buy-in from stakeholders to effect improvements. I think as budgets continue to become very tight, it's important when departments are developing budget proposals and elected members are scrutinising options that the impact on attainment is assessed. And similarly, we have a message in the report with specific interventions and programmes. We'd advocate that there needs to be robust evidence to ensure that obviously money is being used in the best possible way. So just really the last part before I conclude I'd like to talk about is obviously council committees, elected members. So building on what we've talked about so far and the need to understand why schools perform differently and some of the information Kirsty presented to us, I think there's also the need for data to be available to underpin this, and obviously such information comes and is available to elected members. So the boxes at the top that you can see, starting off with pupil performance between primary 1 and S3, which is the broad general education phase, this represents the areas through our work that we would consider elected members on education-related committees would get information on and have an active role in providing the scrutiny challenge. So we know that education is a very interesting one for us as auditors. It's actually a very data-rich area. A lot of the reports and work we do, there's not always a huge amount of data, but education more generally in Scotland is data-rich, and councils do collect a lot of information on this. So from this council's perspective, we did work across all councils to look at how education information came to committee and scrutiny and challenge. It's actually a very positive picture. I mean, obviously you have a dedicated education committee, this forum today, and interestingly there's only 12 councils now in Scotland that still retain an education committee, a lot of them are choosing to merge education in with other big areas or putting it through a sort of scrutiny and governance type committee. But interestingly, what we actually found is a lot of performance information comes to this committee. We found that attainment on national exams is reported, and also importantly, information on pupil performance throughout the broad general education phase. So we saw from our analysis that there was reports in January and September last year, which provided details of pupil performance for standardised testing at 1, 3, 5 and 7. And again, pupils secured appropriate levels for literacy and numeracy at primary 4 and 7. Interestingly, actually, less than half of council committees in Scotland bring information on the broad general education phase to committee. So although there's 1.8 billion of expenditure, we were actually finding that only a third of councils were in any way looking at the performance before the sort of S4, 5 and 6 stage. We produced a checklist as part of this report as well, which identifies questions for elected members to consider posing to councils. So that's actually been available through our website with this report, and it's definitely worth a look at. A lot of the questions, though, you may be asking or may be covered well, but I think it's interesting, and I know some other councils across Scotland have found this useful. So just moving ahead and to conclude, and then happy, Kirsty and myself, to take any questions, observations from the presentation. I mean, publishing the report is actually not the end of the process for us, and there's a lot of activity that we undertake in the post-publication period. We published this actually June last year, so it may seem some time ago, but between summer holidays, the referendum, and then council committee meetings, a lot of councils now are just taking the time to work with us and receive a presentation. So attending committees has been an opportunity, I think, for us to present directly to members on the findings and engage with members and also get feedback on the report and other areas that might inform our thinking for future audit work. We've also been contributing to work with Education Scotland that they're undertaking about developing a national performance framework. We've also been to the Scottish Parliamentary Education Committee to give MSPs a briefing, and they're now doing a piece of work taking evidence on looking at the attainment gap in Scotland and some other work on financial spending. So there's been quite an impact with the work we're doing in terms of how it's being rolled out nationally. There's a formal impact report due in June this year, and at that point we'll make an assessment of how councils have sort of taken forward their recommendations, but also look and consider other areas that we can propose that could potentially be taken forward by the Accounts Commission for future work. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kirsty and Sarah. That was very interesting and very timely as well in terms of what's being proposed with consideration of the savings which are coming through to education committees, and also the reviews we're carrying out in terms of the additional support for learning and the 2 to 18 curriculum. And as you say, it's not the amount of money we spend on education. I think it's how we spend it. And I think this committee has been quite definite in terms of having reported back to how the schools are performing within our region on a regular basis. So if I can throw this open to members, if there's any questions anybody wants to ask. Ian?
Thanks, Chairman. I suppose one of the first things I picked up on was in regards to the trend. It was showing the graphs. I think it was maybe Kirsty showing the graphs, and we've certainly been improving over the last few years, but you see it's starting to kind of level off. So as far as recommendations, just if you could put that into some kind of, if you could verbalise that in regards to where we should be heading, where the Audit Commission certainly thinks, or Audit Scotland thinks we should be heading in regards to maintaining that improvement at least, or making it even better, again, increasing that improvement.
Yes, I mean, obviously there are no national targets in terms of where councils should be trying to achieve, trying to aim for. But obviously the message we're putting out, and Education Scotland and the government would as well, is councils need to try and keep improving. As I mentioned, there are authorities that do keep improving. There are some authorities who are going in the other direction. So it is a positive picture in terms of Dumfries and Galloway. But yes, there is always work that can continue to be done to try and keep improving. And obviously it does become more difficult the tighter the resources become, but then that means that it becomes so much more important in terms of targeting those resources and spending the money on what the council knows will help improve that attainment.
Ian?
Thank you, Chairman. You mentioned that East Renfrewshire and East Dumbartonshire were the two best performing authorities. Are these also 2 of the 12 that have designated education committees?
Interestingly, yes, they both have individual education committees that look. They're two of the two committees, two councils that have solely education-related committees. We didn't actually do a piece of analysis. I don't think. Well, we did start that to say, are education-only committee councils performing better in terms of educational trends, which is maybe where the question's going, that I'm not answering that well. And the answer to that was we actually found no absolutely direct correlation. What we did find is when it's an education-only related committee, there is much more time on the agenda for that discussion and that scrutiny and challenge of information, and that was definitely beneficial.
If I could just add, as Sarah mentioned earlier, there are an awful lot of authorities now across the country where education is now in with social work, wider children's services, housing, leisure, and it means the bigger the services come in, the smaller the amount of time for scrutiny, really.
Jim?
Thanks, Chair. You mentioned the fact that 14 local authorities have improved their performance over the decade, and I'm very pleased to note that Dumfries and Galloway is one of these 14. But therefore, there must be 18 authorities which did not improve. And the question I've got is, are you going to continue this monitoring exercise to gauge the impact of the current round of cuts which are taking place to education? Because the pupils who were examined in 2013 had not actually been affected by the full force of the cuts. A lot of the cuts have come in the last 2 years. So are you going to continue the monitoring exercise?
I think that's a really good question, and one piece of analysis we did during the audit was to look at all the budget papers that are coming to all the committees that deal with education across the country. And what we found that actually nationally, there was not a lot of discussion about the impact of efficiency savings on the short and the longer term attainment. So we're quite keen to put out the message that, when councils are considering the efficiency savings they make, that they do consider what those wider impacts are. I mean, the councils do put forward, this will be the number of FTE on staff, the savings, but actually what does that mean in terms of people's learning? So I think it is a really important point. I think it is a positive picture in terms of Dumfries, because obviously when the papers come forward, there is sections about what is the impact. So I do think that's positive here. I would say it is important to scrutinise that area. We will be keeping a watching eye on what's going on with this. This isn't, as Sarah said, the end of the process. This was essentially an overview of the sort of state of play of what's going on, and there are very interesting times ahead. There are, I think, a lot of other issues that fell out of this audit that I think may warrant further look at, such as additional support for learning. So certainly we'll be keeping an eye on it and doing impact reports and watching what's going on.
Hi, hello. Just to add to that, what I would say is we will obviously do a formal impact report in June this year, so it's only a few months away, and we will put forward proposals to the Accounts Commission round, obviously the issues that we're hearing from committees, the issues coming back from members, and the sort of around the impact of this report. And I think there will be a message to do that further work, particularly around the current financial climate, is something that would warrant further investigation, and for us to kind of keep a close brief on in this area.
Alistair?
Thanks, Chair. One of the most interesting diagrams I saw was the correlation, or the attempted correlation, between the performance in our secondary schools with deprivation, and it seemed all over the place, and that was a surprise to me, and I wondered if that is something. Obviously it poses, when you see a diagram like that, it poses other questions as to why different skills should be different when you would expect to be some sort of similarity. And I wonder if that is unique to this area, or whether you find that in other authorities, that there's a sort of scattering of performance, and you maybe not quite sure, we're not quite sure what the reason for that is.
It's a very interesting question, and we were very interested when we ran that piece of analysis as to what that picture actually looked like. Dumfries schools, it's not that, this isn't unique to Dumfries. I think every single authority, even the island authorities, actually have disparity across the schools. I would say, I put a slight health warning on it in that it is a proxy measure that we use, so it's not absolute in terms of the impact of deprivation. It was the best that we could do, but it is an issue that faces all councils, and it is just that message we're putting out that so long as councils understand why there are differences in performance, some of it will be school role, area, leadership, culture. You know, there's a whole host of issues why some schools will perform differently to others. But so long as the officers and the members, you know, have that information coming forward and can understand, and then are looking to learn from other schools as well, you know, that's the most important thing.
Ian?
Thanks. I'm aware that that there are the effects of reduced budgets. Obviously, affects staffing numbers, property numbers, and so on. But what I'm interested in is a lot of the work that's being done in order to achieve that is not actually just being done for that sake, but to reorganise and re-effectively use the services that currently exist, with multi-skilling and so on. Do you get involved in, how do you evaluate the effectiveness of any reorganisation, rather than just simply the impact of reduced numbers? And do you make any recommendations when councils are trying to reorganise their departments and staff? The ASL obviously is an obvious one, and that affects our own.
I think in the context of this audit, no, we didn't take it as far as that. You know, but I think that would probably be a separate piece of work for us. I mean, that would maybe come through in two vehicles, either through follow-up work that we might choose to do on the back of this audit, particularly if reorganisation and restructuring we're seeing as major things that are coming through educational departments, and it might become a focus for a piece of work we might do later, and also through our programme of best value work that we do. So it's most likely that these would be the vehicles that we would pick up. But I accept in the confines of this audit, we're probably limited in terms of how much we could actually say about the effectiveness or otherwise of reorganisations that we know are happening or are ongoing across Scotland.
Colin, I leapfrogged you, I'm afraid.
I'm quite used to it. Thank you, Chair. I'm joking. Firstly, I'd like to apologise for my ignorance on how affluent Renfrewshire and East Dumbartonshire is. But I would imagine that being in areas of dense population, there would be also dense areas of deprivation. I'm really interested in, these are the two top performing authorities, and how that compares to the number of deprived areas in these authorities. Have you any comment on that?
Yes, I'm going to start by putting health warnings over what I'm about to say and what I have said. We had a lot of discussions during the audit about East Renfrewshire and East Dumbartonshire, and we had a lot of comments from across a number of councils about their situation. They are affluent authorities. They are areas with high levels of affluence. They do also have areas of deprivation. Now, that may only be 1 or 2 secondary schools compared to a number of secondary schools in other authorities. But what we were keen to point out was it is not good enough for councils just to discount them because they think it's a situation that's different. They are doing things that other councils could learn from. So even although they do sit differently from other authorities, there are always things, you know, that councils can learn. And it is so important now, given the times going forward in the finances, that really authorities share information and they learn best practice.
Ian? You want to speak? No. Ian Cruz?
Yes, well, if I get a chance, thanks, Chairman. Just in regards to, you spoke about further council or member involvement. How will you actually do that? You spoke about different things that you do, so how will members, say, in this committee be involved, or even further in the council?
I mean, I think in terms of this committee, you know, the scrutiny work that we did was actually quite a positive picture in terms of you're actually receiving a significant amount of performance information and the right type of information that we would expect to go up to committee to be able to provide the scrutiny and challenge to officers. I mean, we looked across Scotland and we saw huge variation, the type of information. that was going up to committee, and committees are only as good as the information provided to them to scrutinise and challenge. So it is important. I think we have an elected member checklist there. I mean, we would encourage members to look at that, perhaps look at the questions in that, maybe have a further discussion with officers around that. But I think in terms of this individual committee, though, it was a positive picture, you know, and an assurance when we looked at it that the information that you would need to make some of the decisions, and some of the later papers are sort of, you know, add weight to that you're seeing today. So I think overall, actually, it's going in the right direction here. I don't think there'd be too much concern to think that you're not receiving the information that's required to sort of do the role effectively.
So just come back. So, and as far as you're almost like a things to do list over the next 6 months, you'll come back and look at different things, cross-reference. One of the things was further member engagement and involvement. How will that engagement take place?
I think just now, the focus for us just now is initially to make our way around as many committees as we can, which is what we're doing. So we're currently in a programme. We're Shetland last week. We've been to the Western Isles. We're going next week to Murray Council. You know, we've got a whole programme, and that will probably take us up to May and June. I think at that point we have to take stock and see what are the messages coming out from all of these type of events. Do we need a single further event? Also engage with officers directly in those councils. And also there'll be a number of councils that we don't perhaps have as much direct engagement with, so to try and understand what they're doing, and really from then make a judgment call about what further work we need. So probably at this stage I can't actually give you a guarantee what that looks like, because we're still in that kind of first round of meetings just now.
Jim?
Hi, thanks. So very briefly, it's on that chart you showed about deprivation. How do you define deprivation? Is it simply by children who apply or qualify for school meals? Because that's what you seem to suggest. Where in some communities that'll be right, but in others you've got the SIMD, Scottish Indices of Multiple Deprivation, where there are huge issues for huge communities, never mind one or two pupils, and that's not taken away from the number of pupils that require a wee bit of support. How do you define them, and do you make a differential then? And that can be rural and urban. And the other thing is, how do you assess when you're doing the assessment of schools parental choice? Because both in urban and rural settings, you have one high performance school, you have one that's, shall we say, marginally below that, and parents then suddenly move the child to the high attaining school, and as a consequence of that, it appears that one school is achieving a far greater degree of success than the other, and it's simply because the parents are moving children they think they're going to achieve to that school, and that complicates matters for folk like us.
Just in terms of the first point about deprivation, you're right. I mean, in terms of standard measures of deprivation, the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation is obviously what is used. For the purposes of that piece of analysis, we chose to use the eligibility for free school meals as a proxy measure. We spoke to the government about it and thought that was the best way, and it was purely because it was an awful lot of work to try and produce deprivation profiles for each individual school catchment area. So it is a proxy, but you know, it still has its validity. In terms of parental choice, we didn't go down to that level in terms of this audit. We stayed quite high, but you know, we take the point that actually parental choice is one of those things that will influence attainment. It happens across all authorities that, you know, there will be some schools that are seen as perhaps more desirable for for parents to get their pupils into. So it will have an impact, but what I would say is it's for councils to understand that and know what's going on in their schools.
Colin, you want to?
Thanks, Chair. Could I just finish off by thanking Kirsty and Sarah on behalf of the Education Department. I know that you've come a long way to come and speak to us. I think members will outcomes. We should be pleased that we've moved into the top third and not the bottom third. We should be pleased that we're one of the councils which has got improvement in all 10 areas, and we should be pleased as a committee that we've asked for the right information. However, one thing one can learn from Eastern Bartonshire and East Renfrewshire is that you have to be absolutely relentless about trying to keep improving. And we really recognise this issue about a ceiling. We think we can continue to do better. We also noted the difference in performance between some of our schools and some of the better performing schools. So we're not going to be complacent about that. Second issue is about impact. We are about to face as a committee and as a council over the next few years some really difficult decisions. around making savings. And I want to reassure members that the Education Department and others will try to give you the very best professional advice around what we think will have the least negative impact. Thank you again.
And do feel welcome to come back at any time. It's obviously stimulated a great deal of thought in the committee. Thanks a lot. Okay, members, if we can move to item 4, Education Services Revenue Budget Monitoring Report, and it's Karen. Am I? Great, item 5. Oh, the recommendation, sorry. Go back to item 4, the recommendations. Members are asked, having received a briefing from Audit Scotland, to consider the Audit Scotland report on school education, findings from Dumfries and Galway Council and recommendations. Happy to do that? Yeah. Okay, so if we can move to item 5. Karen, is there anything you want to add to your report?
I think just to highlight to members that there has been a significant improvement of 118,000 from the position previously reported to this committee in November, and that there's still confidence that a break-even position will be returned.
Members, any questions? Ted?
Thank you, Chair. Page 10, item 3.6. It's indicated there that there's been an increased level of demand for clothing grants. Can you tell me what that is? And can you tell me if that is a continuing trend?
Yeah, I mean, clothing grants, we have seen an increase, I think, for about the last 3 years now, and it seems to have levelled off, but we are still way above budgeted level for clothing grants.
Ian?
Just a small one, just in regards to the further measures to be identified in regards to the break-even point. Just to get clarity, is that an issue or is it not? It's 71's really, I think, against 130 million is a small amount, but in paragraph 3.7, it still shows a small pressure in regards to additional supported learning, and that obviously we're looking at that. But do we see that as being a difficulty as we go forward or not?
Karen?
No, I wouldn't see that being a problem. I think we're clear that there, like from the report, we're aware of where all the pressure areas are. We focus our time on reviewing them and to make sure that we try and alleviate pressures going forward. So no, I think I'm confident there's a good handle on all areas and that we can bring in a break-even position.
Alistair?
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask with reference to page 13, the appendix 1A, regarding the underspend in psychological services and also in the preschool sector. I think we all are aware of the importance of early identification, and that's why I'm asking in particular about the psychological services.
Both of those areas of underspend that you mentioned are due to current staff vacancies, so they will be sort of one-off underspends, and it's just until we get positions filled.
Alistair?
Yes, I thought that was the answer that I would get. But next question would therefore be, it's not as much a question, but an earnest hope that we get these vacancies filled soon.
Dick?
Sorry. Right. Congratulations to the department on their efforts to match the budget over by the end of the financial year. If I can refer you to page 13, appendix 1A there, and the total budget's there for the Education Directorate, which is 17.6 million. Now, I thought we were doing well, cutting £300,000 out of that budget over the last couple of years. But when you look at the review for the additional support for learning, which is only a budget of 13.5 million, I think that we should be urgently looking at that 17.6 million. Perhaps bring a report back to the committee to understand what this money is spent on, and and look to see where money could be saved.
Chair, if I could, I'll ask Karen for the detail, but just to be absolutely clear, I think around 14 million of that is actually PPP costs. Okay, although it's not clear from that, because Karen will maybe explain that, but we certainly, if we had 17 million in the directorate, I think we would be, would be in a slightly better and a more relaxed position sitting up here.
Yeah, confirm. I think it's neither the sort of £15 million is schools PPP, the sort of unitary charge for the use of our schools. If members found it useful, I could highlight that separately in the report going forward, so you can see the directorate on its own, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think it probably would be, take that out of the equation. Any more? No? Okay, so if we can move to the recommendations. We asked to note 2.1 that based on the position at the end of December 2014, education services are projected to break even against the agreed budget. Yeah. 2.2, progress against the delivery of the agreed savings applied to the 2014-15 education services budget as detailed in Appendix 2. Yeah. And 2.3, note the progress against the delivery of the agreed policy development allocations applied to the 2014-15 education services budget as detailed in Appendix 3. Okay. Thank you. So if we move to item 6, scrutiny of budget proposals 2015-16 and 2017-18. Just want to have a confer with the clerk. Okay, so I'm reminded there is no provision in the budget process for members to add to any, to add any other templates at this stage. This should be done by the 30th of January through the process previously agreed, which is to lodge any proposed alternatives with Paul Garrett. Okay, so what I propose to do is to go through the templates one by one, and if members have got any points they wish to make, they can do so at that point. So if we can move to page 27, school meals price increase. Any comments or queries? Dick?
Yeah, I think there was a report to GG First Committee about the school meals and about an overspend, as per an underspend this year. Does that underspend mean that we can manage within the present budget without raising the prices of the meals?
I don't have the answer to that at the moment. I would need to consult with those who were involved in that report, I'm afraid.
Well, if you could do that and then come back, if you could email out to all of the members the response. Gail?
Yeah, it was just to ask, are we renegotiating the commission with DG First at the moment? Because I'm aware that our current commission runs from 2012 to 2015. Is that in the process? Because my understanding is that these savings should already have been taken operationally and probably shouldn't have been in the budget in the first place.
Gillian?
Certainly we haven't commenced any formal discussions regarding the commissioning framework. I understand that the strategic commissioning framework is somewhat in abeyance with the reshaping of the council, and certainly as soon as we have clarity as to the processes to do that. But on an operational level, we are discussing the increasing food costs with Alan on a regular basis.
Anybody else on that particular option? No. Graham?
Yeah, it is our understanding that a decision was taken a couple of years ago that school meals could be increased by up to 5% through management rather than having it as a budget item and even bring it to committee. Is that still the case?
That certainly was in the commissioning document. It was 5, but no more than 5%. And any increase in addition to 5%, or if there was a change to the structure, we would ask for member support in that process.
But I think probably it's back here because it does form part of the budget, balancing the budget effectively. Yeah. Okay. So if we move to page 29, primary and secondary core delivery. Members, any queries or comments on that particular option?
Thank you, Chair. I'll try not to bore the meeting with details about RICT, but here goes. Reading this carefully and rereading, my understanding from it is that primary teachers in particular, correct me if I'm wrong, are entitled to 2.5 hours RICT, and that's still there. And what we're saying here, what I'm reading here is that is covered by the provision of specialist teachers in the classroom, and that is a good thing because primary teachers are generalists and not everybody. I mean, I could never play the piano, maybe time yet. So it's useful and good that we have specialist teachers in the classroom. What puzzles me is that I never thought that it was the entire 2.5 hours. The entire 2.5 hours was covered by specialists. What I'm reading here is that there is an over-provision of specialist teachers now. So that's my first question is that true? And if it is true, and the 2.5 hours RICT, which is statutorily has to be done, is totally covered by specialists, and there's too many specialists, or will this reduction be achieved by tweaking as a full-time equivalent reduction? Will it be achieved by reducing the hours of specialists? And I take it that will be something that can be negotiated. I hope I'm making myself.
Happy to clarify that for you, Councillor. The specialist, some authorities don't have any specialist teachers whatsoever. We in Dumfries and Galloway have been blessed by the fact that we historically have built up a number of specialist teachers, and it is a good thing to have specialist teachers in schools where possible. Nonetheless, we do anticipate and expect our general mainstream teachers to develop all of their talents. The specialist teachers were not brought in or designed to cover RICT, which is reduction in class contact time for primary teachers, but being in place, we were able to, for some of the time, use specialist teachers' input to also cover RICT at the same time, cover for other teachers. There is an over-provision if you simply set that against the number of hours that you would need to cover RICT. We'd think we would need around 24, 25 FTE to cover all the time for every teacher to have 2.5 hours free. We had up till last year around 39 specialist teachers, so arguably more than was required to cover RICT. We didn't want to cut it straight back, and we lost 7 FTE specialist teachers last year, and we're looking to lose a further 6 this year. We will still have specialist teachers in our schools, and we will still have enough provision to cover RICT time. I might also add that we have adequate requests through ERVS to hopefully ensure that no one is compulsorily forced into changing their job.
Alistair?
Thanks, Chair. I won't detain you much longer. So my earnest hope is, and question is, that RICT will largely in the future and foreseeable future be covered by specialist teachers, because it makes good sense surely for the people's development that this time is used by specialists rather generalists.
I would think, Councillor, that question is one that has to be addressed when we get beyond next year and when there are far bigger pressures around, and some of those sort of questions need to be considered within the scoping review for the further 4 million that needs to be found for the Education Department beyond next session, and there might be an opportunity to hear a bit about that in the following paper.
Ian?
Thanks, Chairman. I suppose going back to the presentation we had earlier, the question I think applies to most of these, maybe not so much the previous one, is in regards to attainment. What effect does this have on attainment? Because I don't see it within the impact assessment. So is there any, that would apply to any of these, I think, as they come forward. So that's my question, please, Chairman.
I think, Chair, the way that we try to ensure that we minimise the challenge on attainment is to maintain as far as possible frontline mainstream classroom teachers The two savings, they're not easy ones. The two savings for primary, one is a reduction in specialisms, and you know, that's unfortunate, there's no doubt. The other one is around 7 additional teachers that we have out there above formula. So we're not cutting away in terms of the main formula for all schools. Nonetheless, it will be a challenge. We're looking to mitigate that cut because it's likely to be in areas of deprivation, mitigate that through the increased focus on deprivation through the ASL review. For the secondary staff, how we try to mitigate the impact of any savings is to try to ensure that the head teachers, who are strong managers and understand their own schools, have maximum levels of flexibility in how they make the savings. So we transfer, if you like, the equivalent FTE in terms of a saving to the budget for the head teachers, and they can make decisions as to how and where they're saved. We've done that over the last 3 or 4 years, and again, I have to highlight from the Audit Scotland presentation earlier, there has been £7, £8, £9 million out of education over the last 6 years, and we've actually increased attainment significantly. So it's not impossible to maintain and improve our attainment, but nonetheless it is a challenge.
Colin?
Thank you, Chair. Just a bit more information on the specialist teachers who stand in for Rick. Are these specialists in a specialised subject that teach the whole class? They're not like helping special needs, or maybe the wrong phrase, but that is, and just be interested in sort of roughly what specialist subjects they teach. Is it languages or whatever?
It's a really good question, Councillor. We forget because we're involved all the time. But yeah, and so when we say specialists, we're actually talking about art, music, and PE. So it's art, music, and PE, which quite often, you know, some primary teachers might be able to play the guitar, but not every one of them. So the point about that is that is a genuine specialism that sometimes is very helpful to bring into the classroom, but there'll be challenges in the longer term in terms of trying to sustain those measures.
Gail?
Thank you, Chair. It's actually in relation to the previous question. I mean, the secondary cuts, they do seem, we're getting to a pretty sticky bum time, to be honest, in secondary schools. I think we're seeing them under huge pressure. And I do have, no, well, I mean, it is, the teachers in schools are worried about this. You have an HT strategy group. What's the feedback been from them so far? Because I think it's incredibly important that we understand the impact, particularly in relation to course choice, of this saving.
The position with the secondaries is that they are under some significant pressure in terms of staffing levels, but it's a combination of necessary savings that need to be brought about or voted on, along with falling roll. It's somewhat unhelpful to secondaries that at the same time as they're needing to make some savings to their overall staffing levels, at the same time, every time a secondary school, for example, has 17 less pupils, they have 1 less teacher allocated. So that combination's been challenging. It's been challenging over the last 3 or 4 years, and the teacher refresh and ERVS agenda has been really helpful, because again, it's who you've got and how you use them rather than just the numbers. But I would agree with you, Councillor, that we're getting to the stage that it's really getting quite tight. We have worked with our secondary strategy group and secondary heads around some things they might do to alleviate some of those challenges, and certainly when we get into the next stage, which is the review coming forward, I really think that the Council needs to consider some radical proposals that are happening elsewhere around perhaps a slight reduction in hours for children, or a cutting back on some subjects, or, you know, and we simply cannot keep delivering everything with less staff. But if we're quite clever about it, I don't think we have to lose out in terms of attainment.
No more questions? Okay, so we move on to the next template, which is on page 32, reduction to secondary management points. Have any questions or comments on that? Jim?
Thanks, Chair. Can you confirm that the flexibility offered by management points allows the employment of additional support for learning staff?
Yes, in an indirect way, because actually what we said earlier to Councillor Carruthers' question was how do we try and make sure that attainment isn't negatively impacted on? How we try to do that in secondary is we allow the managers and the leaders to run the school. So any savings that we bring about, whether it's in ASL teachers, or it's in management points, or it's in staffing levels, is simply translated into budget, and we allow the head teachers to make the decisions. So in theory, a head teacher could lose a principal teacher in some area and actually use the saving, if it's more than is required, to, for example, employ an extra 0.5 ASL teacher if they so choose. Okay.
That's all the speakers we've got at the moment. I think that's the final template. Yep. So if we can go back to page 19 and turn to recommendations. Members are asked to scrutinise the details of those elements of the administration's budget proposals for revenue spending and capital investment that relate to education and services in line with the agreed budget development process and timetable. I think we've done that. All agreed? Oh, sorry, A.
Just a small point, Chairman, in regards to the attainment question that I asked earlier. Should that be part of the impact assessment? It's not specific to the administration budget, but just thinking for a process for further years, because obviously it's a question that would come up again and again and again. Should is there a detriment, or positive or negative actually, in towards the attainment as we take things forward?
I mean, in many ways the attainment's not part of the impact assessment because that's a quality impact assessment, but I think what we would look to do as savings come forward, particularly in terms of the overall review for the following 2 years, is be very clear about what we thought the impact on attainment would be. Okay.
With that clarification, if we can move to item 7, the structural delivery 2 to 18 service review. This obviously follows on from the additional support for learning review, and I think it's been emphasised today we can't just continue cutting the budget to the services and maintain it in aspect, as it were, so we do need to carry out a review. So Anne, I think you're going to speak to this. Do you want to give us a brief overview of what's being proposed? Because it obviously is quite a hefty, certainly a hefty appendix, or several appendices to this, so if you want to just give us a quick overview.
Morning, members, and thank you. There's a couple of things I just wanted to say about the paper. The first is that we learned a huge amount from the ASL review about the impact of one review on another, and which is why we are proposing to bring all of this together. Clearly, supporting learners is a very complex and sensitive area, and it's an extensive area, and that's why it needed that degree of rigour and sensitivity when we managed it. However, we clearly saw some connections at the early learning stage between additional support for learning and the rest of the service, and so we're very clear that this has to be brought together so that we can offer some cohesion and consistency all the way from age 2 to 18. So that's the reason this has been brought together. And also, could I just point out on page 44, there's an error in the paper. It says that the teaching and non-teaching unions were consulted in the preparation of this report, and they were, but it also then says are in agreement, but the teaching unions are not in agreement, and that's an error in that paper, and it goes on to explain what unions have said in response. So the review is, we have a series of 10 meetings, and we're already looking at a significant range of ideas from other local authorities. Although the service review process suggests that we should be consulting and engaging at this point, and that we should be benchmarking at the next stage, we're actually having to reverse that because there's a significant amount of intelligence across authorities that's going to be very useful for us in our deliberations. So we've started that process, and Hugh is working with the Early Years and Integration Strategy Group to go through that process. So we're going through a parallel process at the same time and bringing together all of the information for you.
Director, you wanted to say something?
Just a further clarification on the statement about the teaching unions. We asked for clarification at LNCT, which is the Local Negotiation Committee for Teachers, last week, just to absolutely confirm whether it's only the EIS or it's all of the teaching unions, and we await that further clarification.
Okay, members, throw it open for discussion. Ted?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch what the director said there, but could you actually tell me if the EIS view is a local view or a national view?
I'm not entirely certain of that. I think it may be the local EIS view, but I'm not certain about that.
Would it be possible to get clarification? And once again,
Yeah, we'll
send it
seek
out
full
for-
clarification for you.
Rob?
Thanks very much, Chairman. I think maybe Councillor Thompson will recall an occasion not that long ago where the issue of differentiating between the executive, the local executive view, and the issue of whether that reflected views of members was a moot point. The clarification, I think, would be useful. Although I maybe sympathise with the sentiment, I'm not sure I would subscribe to the decision, but it's their decision to take. It would be good for us to understand it, I think. What I wanted to ask, though, was, having been quite closely involved with the cluster working review and then maybe somewhat at the beginning of the ASL review, I do think that bringing the three that we had originally talked about together is a very sensible idea. The thing I'm concerned about is capacity, because, and particularly I think with regard to engagement, because effectively we'll be talking about all parents naturally, and we'll be doing that presumably at pretty much the same time. I think it's the right way forward, but I'm just slightly worried about how we do it in such a way that we're communicating what we're doing, and we're trying to maintain the levels of involvement that we actually succeeded to get with the ASL review and took a bit of doing, but we got to in the end with cluster working. I think that's my primary concern. I don't know if there's an easy answer right enough, but anything you can maybe offer on that?
Absolutely. We have quite serious lessons learned through the engagement process. One of the things I was doing this morning before I came was reorganising the schedule, which is in your appendix, because of that very point. We're working with the primary and secondary head teacher strategy group on this review. We initially had set out a timetable, which is in your appendix, which suggested that we were going to do the consultation on the 16th of February to the 20th of March. We're already pushing that back because we're aware of the concerns about the depth of the engagement that we need to go through, and also so that we're very clear about what we're offering up for consideration. But could I say that through both the cluster working review and the additional support for learning review, we were very aware that people didn't feel that we'd consulted enough, and therefore we extended opportunities. But it's also about how people receive information. And when it becomes an issue for them personally, then people tend to respond. So we have to be able to use all the mechanisms that we've got. And in actual fact, one of the first things we've done for this review is develop a communication strategy, because that's been the big thing that everybody has felt hasn't happened. The perception is that it hasn't happened. Although from our records, what we've offered has happened. So it's been very important this time to set up a communication strategy and not only use the mechanisms that we have to contact parents, but also use the mechanisms that we have in terms of the diary for education services from now till June.
Yeah, I think sort of talking about lessons learned in terms of the supporting learners review. Having been along to several of the family engagement forums, I think when people actually learned, partially through obviously the director's letter which went out in the school bag drop, were actually given the opportunity to come along and actually speak to the staff involved and find out what was proposed. I think that alleviated a lot of fears that had been expressed mainly through the press. Dick?
Thanks, Chair. I think it's a good thing that we're looking at the service review 2 to 18. I think we should be looking at how we can deploy our current resources properly to make savings. That's a good make sure we spend the money wisely. At the same time, there's talk about a negative impact on children's outcomes and attainment earlier in the agenda. I think one of the options that should come before us is an option, a savings option, where the impact on outcomes and attainment for children is neutral. What we can do better with the resources we've got and the savings we would accrue from that. So I think that should be an option given to us at the end of the process. Now, we're talking about at least one of the unions isn't involved in the process. So I think it's important. It makes it more important that we involve teachers and assistants at the chalk face who are actually involved in delivering the curriculum to children. I think learning from the Support for Learning review, perhaps we could involve more chalk face practitioners. I was looking at the Highland Council review of Support for Learning, and it did involve a primary school support assistant and a secondary school teacher. So perhaps that's something that we could involve in the review as well. And we were talking when Audit Scotland were giving us a presentation, there was a question about how councillors could be more involved in this processes and the work. The Highland Council, well, I'm not sure whether it's a good council or not, but there was a couple of elected members on the review panel, including the children's champion. And if we have a similar sort of person within the membership, I don't know, we have, then perhaps that children's champion should be there to look after the children's interests.
Anne?
We were very clear to invite all the different layers of staff within Additional Support for Learning to comment on the service review and in fact be on the service review team. So we're very, very keen to have as many voices from the chalk face as possible. I would just like to say that we'll continue to do that with the 2 to 18 review, and also that Highland Council had a £1 million pathfinder to run their reviews.
And Director?
I don't know quite what the question was, but that's okay.
What I was saying was,
right.
given the the relatively tight timetable which is involved in this, and do we need an interim report to come back in May just to make sure we are on progress?
I think if you remember with the ASL review, it was such a big review and it involved 29 services. It was really incredibly complex, and it was important to bring an interim review to give you a sense of the direction it was going in. What I would be a wee bit concerned, and I'm picking up Councillor Davidson's point here, that whether there is capacity to bring back a really early interim report, or indeed whether we shove back the whole timescale to allow for an interim report, or what value there would be in that. And I suppose I would put that question to the lead for it.
Well, we're planning to come back on the 10th of July with options. I can't quite remember, even from this morning, what the dates were that we were going to move the consultation back. But what we can do, because if we do a survey, then we can have those results quite quickly. They can be analysed very quickly. So potentially we could bring that back. If you let me go back and check the timescales and check the dates of the May committee and our end date for consultation, then potentially we could bring that back.
It might also be helpful to add, Chair, my understanding in terms of governance. It's part of a 3-year budget, so it's not necessary to bring this in time for any budget decisions for next session. Any decisions that come from the review that's being carried out won't impact until August 2016. Therefore, there isn't actually an absolutely mad rush to have this back with you in July, other than trying to alleviate some of the uncertainty for staff. And I think it's just to get the appropriate balance. And I think if we remit to the lead to keep a review of the timescales and have discuss at the next committee meeting whether an interim report would be helpful on progress.
Sorry, could I just say that I think that the opportunity for staff to get used to the proposals over the year between 2015 and 2016 are what we were thinking about, and that's so that people could be familiar with everything and familiar with the real impact, which is why there was a whole school year allocated for that process. Because sometimes what we've definitely learned from the other two reviews is that the more familiar people become with the potential impact and what it's going to mean for them on the ground, the easier they've been with the process and with the decisions.
Yeah, and I think, given the sort of timescales we're looking at, then, if we need to have more time to feed back to the committee and to complete the process, then we should take it. So if we can leave it open, if Anne can look at what's available with a view to bringing something back to either the next committee meeting or the one after that, probably the one after that, I would think. Jim?
Thanks. Just a very brief question. End of year summary, education services, page 83. The first red status or warning for members is primary 7 pupils in 20% in the most deprived data zones, and it's about general maths. And if you go back to the pie chart on page 79, it shows about 2% of pupils leaving school are either unemployed, not seeking work, or not knowing what their predicted or future path is. Are these two tied together? Are these the pupils that are no achieving right out through school that are featured in this report? And if so, do we have a mechanism to try and address that?
I don't think you can absolutely directly say that the same kids who've not been able to do maths are the ones that aren't going out and going into further destinations, but there's no doubt at all there's likely to be a correlation. Maths was an issue for us. It was right up and down the whole of Scotland. 2 or 3 years ago, we recognised that it was the one area in Dumfries and Galloway where we felt we were behind other places. Certainly in terms of the rest of the UK, with a huge intervention strategy. It became a big part of each school improvement plan for every school across the authority, and we've made big strides there. So we are trying to address that.
Alistair?
Thanks, Chair. I've listened to what's been said and understand the reasons for taking the 3 service reviews together. I would like to say that I presume the timetable will be shorter, but I wouldn't want to. It's a big job of work, and I wouldn't like to see it rushed. So that's all, really.
Dick?
Just following on from what I said before, perhaps the next interim report maybe give us options how elected members could be involved in the final process before it actually comes to the committee. But I think there's one bit of work which is quite important and quite urgent, which is property rationalisation. I think there was a template last year for a saving of £200,000, and I think that's been subsumed into this review, and I think there could be savings quite soon from property rationalisation, and I think maybe an earlier report on that could be brought forward.
Okay. Yes, quite agree. The part of the scope of the paper that Anne is leading on will cover every possible option, and we will look at what every other authority is doing in order to make savings. We recognise anyway, even if we didn't have to make savings, that sometimes, particularly in the very smallest of our schools, it may not be providing the best educational environment. So there is ongoing work and discussion with members and local communities, which relates to the possibility of some rationalisation. However, I think what we would say is that in the scoping paper, in the paper that comes back to you, and whether that is July or a wee bit later than that, there'll be further options around extending those measures. And really it will be up to members to make some of those difficult decisions, because there can be some savings there, but you need to recognise that already we're looking at some of the smaller schools and considering matters, And also within Dumfries Learning Town, as you hear about in a wee while, there are effectively 4 or 5 school closures in there too.
Peter?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make one point on page 85, one of the KPIs on attendance rate, where we're saying that the national target should be 91.9%. So what we're saying is that it's acceptable for 1 in 10 children nearly to not be at school. I don't think that is acceptable, and I think the target rate ought to be closer to 100%, if not 100%.
At the moment, we tend to set aside the national average as a target to surpass. So that's the national average, and we're doing better than that. Clearly, we can set more aspirational targets, and if that's something that members would like to see us doing, we can do that. We can have a look at that. But in reasonable terms, we tend to look at the national average. Audit Scotland are telling us that we're doing better than the national average in a lot of ways, which I think would allow us to slightly inflate and be slightly more aspirational without being unrealistic about some of the targets that we have.
I would just say that if my child was losing 1 day in 10, I'd be furious.
That's something we could consider when we look at performance reporting in future, whether the targets are appropriate or not, yeah? Okay. So can we move to recommendations? So members asked to 2.1, agree that the 3 previously proposed service reviews, early years and integration, primary and secondary education be considered together to ensure a coherent and consistent infrastructure for all children and young people across Dumfries and Galloway. I think we're agreed on that, are we? Yeah. 2.2, consider the scoping template of the structural delivery 2 to 18 service review attached to Appendix 1, which outlines the service review savings plan target value by 2017-18 is 3.4 million. Happy with that? Yeah. On 2.3, agree the scope and decide outcome of the structural delivery 2 to 18 service review detailed in the scoping template Appendix 1 with the idea of possibly bringing an interim report in May. Yeah. Happy with that? Ian?
Happy with that, Chairman. Just, I suppose having a comment in regards to the concerns that were raised earlier with the EIS union, I just wonder if there's any influence we can have over, or at least have a communication with them as an education committee to say, listen, because I'm not very happy with the fact that they're there, they're representing the good times but not the bad times, and I think that's when they need to be there for certainly their membership and when the difficult times are there. So, I mean, certainly, the joint consultative group is aware, at least making them aware of that, and that might be a potential way, but I think we should certainly put it on the radar that we're not, it doesn't sit comfortable with me anyways.
I think, first of all, we need clarification about whether this is EIS policy nationally or whether it is locally, and then we'll take it from there. Yeah. Okay. So if we move on to page 91, item 8, Dalbeattie Learning Campus project update. I think it's Claire to speak to this presentation. Okay. Yeah, this is a presentation as well as a paper. We've also got Paul here. If there's any financial questions members want to ask in terms of both this and the Dumfries Learning Town project. Claire?
Sorry, Chair, do you mind if I just speak? Just briefly, sorry. While we're trying to sort out the presentation, we have had a few ICT gremlins this morning. As you can see, one of the items that we had and we were very pleased we'd managed to do is get 3D modelling so we could take you through walk-arounds of the school. Unfortunately, we have got a gremlin in terms of the ICTs accepting this software, a very simple software, but the AV system is not very happy about it, so apologies for this. We have got IT people working on it. It's unlikely that the 3D modelling will be shown this morning. We can certainly show you the images, what we can do, because the imagery is working on our computers fine, it's just not working on the big screens. If anybody had the time to stay on afterwards, then we can show you on the small screens just now. We can't email it out because it's too big to go over the email system. And as I say, we will sort it out for future committees. So apologise that we're getting this. Try and get...
Members, we think we've got a solution to the problems with the Dalbeattie Learning Campus, which requires ICT to intervene. So can we move to item 8? Can we move to item 9 at Dumfries Learning Town? And once again, it's Claire with Paul to answer any financial questions that arise. Claire?
Again, apologies for this. Firstly, can I just introduce Frank Crilly to my right, who's our new Senior Project Manager, and you'll see his faces at future committee meetings. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to bring Frank along. Frank brings a wealth of project management expertise and will be leading the project managers on the Dalbeattie Learning Campus and the Dumfries Learning Town teams. We've also got Annie Johnson, who's sitting at the back of the room as well, who's currently with CCS, who's going to be transferring across to us on the 2nd of February because she was successful in the recruitment of one of the project management posts as well. So I just felt it was important to introduce those names and faces to you. With respect to Dumfries Learning Town, this is a project update. I'm not proposing to add any additional information to what is proposed in the paper, but I'm very happy to take questions, Chair and elected members.
Members? Colin?
Thank you, Chair. There was one specific question that I would like to have asked in item 8. Are we coming back to that? Or we're going back to that, right? Okay. In that case, I will be quiet for the time being.
Okay. Rob?
I was wondering if the fetching blue colour was the colour you were going to paint Dalbeattie, but anyway. The question I've got is actually not dissimilar to last time, or rather to the previous item, in terms of resourcing, because we're doing, 4 statutory consultations, I think, if I've counted them right, and presumably they'll all be in pretty close succession. I don't know if they'll be consecutive or concurrent. Maybe I missed that in the paper. And having been through the Dalbeattie one, which I would assume would be the kind of thing we're talking about since it's technical closure and relocation, that was nevertheless really pretty involved and took quite a long time. In fact, it took an awful long time. Just checking that we're going to be able to handle all of these, and we've got the capacity to handle them all within the timescales, given they've got to be signed off by the High Hegians, etc., Education Scotland and all that.
Thank you, Councillor Davison. It's a very pertinent question, and we don't take the whole approach to statutory consultation lightly. We know it's resource heavy, as you say. I think what stands in our favour now is we have experience from the Dalbeattie scenario and Sorby recently as well, so we're familiar with the process. That's helped us hugely in setting up expertise within our team, but also all the templates that has to happen as well. So what is really good is we have people from the legal side, from learning and teaching, and from the project side that are all working together who have experience in terms of the governance aspect of this, and also
Claire,
in terms
can I just stop you there? Apparently there's problems with people hearing at the back. I don't know whether you can get closer to the microphone.
Apologies. Can you hear me now? Do you want me just to speak very loudly? Okay. Okay. With respect to the point about the resourcing to take forward the statutory consultation, it's a very important point and something we don't underestimate. We do have experience now with recent statutory consultation processes. So we have legal and governance people, educational people and project people up to speed and familiar with the processes, which is a huge step forward. We also have the templates set up now, which again is a huge item as well. We don't take it lightly. We've done a lot of pre-engagement and pre-consultation with staff, parents, and starting in the local communities. So what I would say is we've done a lot of preemptive enabling work before we get to this stage to ascertain people's opinions and thoughts. It is something we'll monitor very closely because we know the process is very unforgiving and we have to follow it, and it's very prescriptive. We've also engaged with Scottish Government as well to make them aware of it, and we're engaging with Education Scotland, so we're preempting all these timelines. The timelines won't officially start until we bring the paper to committee, and at that point in time you'll see the specific what's happening on a week-by-week basis over the 9 months it takes to do that. So you as elected members will have visibility in terms of what we're doing and the ability to monitor it as well. You'll also have engagement through the public consultation events, which we'll invite you to as well. So you should have visibility on this process to hopefully give you that reassurance that we're taking it very seriously and we have got the necessary resourcing in place. The reason why we've approached it like this is to make sure that we don't have too many running concurrently, because we know our capacity and we know we need to make sure that where we commit to, we have to be able to resource it, which is why we're just looking at the first two just now.
Anyone else? No? Okay, we move to the recommendations rather than... Okay, so 2.1, can we note the progress made with the progression of the Dumfries Learning Town project? 2.2, note the statutory consultation processes required to deliver the Dumfries Learning Town project. 2.3, agree to commence with statutory consultations on the proposals for creating a new Northwest campus as detailed in paragraph 310. Right. 2.4, agree to commence with statutory consultation on the proposal to close Elmbank School and to create a service that caters to the needs of the secondary-aged young people with social, emotional and behavioural difficulties, operate as a service within the existing secondary schools and at the learning hubs detailed in paragraph 311. Right. Agree to commence with statutory consultation in 2015-16 on the proposal to co-locate Noble Hill Primary School on the Dumfries High School site, detailed in paragraph 313. 2.6, agree to commence with statutory consultation in 2015-16 on the proposal to co-locate Lawburn Primary School on the Dumfries Academy site, detailed. And 2.7, agree that officers bring to committee in 2015 a proposal on the policy arrangements to ensure consistency of school role across Dumfries as detailed in paragraph 316. Do we have an approximate date? Do we have an approximate date? Obviously 2015 is quite a broad target.
What we'd like to do is bring the paper prior to the summer holidays, so either May or July.
Okay.
Chair, could I just say, just to clarify, qualify a statement made in the last paper in relation to Councillor Brodie's question around less buildings or fewer buildings or savings around rationalisation. Just to be clear, what we're saying here is the possibility that you will have 5 fewer campuses, but not to confuse that with 5 school closures. And I apologise if I've misled anybody there.
Okay.
For passage, Chairman, with regards to recommendation 2.4, can you just remind us in as far as the, I think we've agreed the site location, just remind where we are in the actual process in regards to the learner hub in particular, it refers to 3.11.
As per the guidance from Education Committee, I think it was in July, the preferred location for the Learning Hub was King George V, and at the moment we're progressing with site investigations there to ascertain how it could be built and what are the challenges with that.
For confirmation, at Education Committee we agreed that was the preferred site, subject to a public consultation meeting and a paper to come back on cost and affordability. The public consultation meeting had already taken place and was reported, but we have still to come back on affordability and cost around specifics in terms of the site.
Ian, you there? Okay, just to give a wee bit more time to try and sort out the ICT gremlins. Can we move on to item 10? Property, buildings, schools, asset class prioritisation process. I think, is it Lara or yourself?
Lauren and myself have prepared the paper. Again, there wouldn't be any further information we'd want to add over and above what's in the paper. But if any of the members want clarification, I'm happy to answer any questions.
yeah, to a certain extent, this is a preliminary paper. There'll be a more detailed report on individual schools coming to the next Education Committee in March. Yeah, Jim.
Thanks, Chair. A very loose hook on this one, but nevertheless, I've spoken to Claire about this. 310, it now talks about focus on two areas to determine priority order when you're talking about condition and accessibility. And it's just maybe a timely reminder as well of what can happen. The hall in the PPP school in Wallace Hall roof blew off. Allegations are it poor construction that caused that. And they still can't use the school playing field, and that's after a number of years, a number of meetings and ongoing issues. And I would just ask Claire to advise us where we're in relation to that. And I know told me yesterday, but she wouldn't mind repeating it, because I don't think, it's no sorted. I think that's the problem we've got. It's no dealt with, it should be dealt with, and we just can't continue saying it's in hand.
Claire?
Just to confirm the conversation we had yesterday, and we did have a meeting of local elected members about this subject as well. Since the PP team came in within our remit in April, we have been working very closely with E4D&G, who are the SPV provider, who are responsible for managing and delivering the service in our PPP schools. And they do acknowledge that there are issues with the external pitches at Wallace Hall. We have engaged an expert in terms of Ironside Farah, who are providing very good expert advice in relation to this. What I would say is we have both agreed what the issues are, we've both agreed what the solutions are, and I would say we're 85% in terms of agreement. We are having a formal meeting in the next 2 weeks, and I'd hope to get the balance of the agreement in place for March. And the intention is that the SPV provider will commence remedial works in March over the spring and summer period to rectify the issues. So we're aware of the issue, we understand it's pressing, we have put the resource and focus in to deal with it, and I am comfortable with the progress we've made in resolving it. We've also had the benefit of support from Scottish Futures Trust as part of their review into our PPP and specific issues in terms of construction defects, and found that very useful for support as well.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for that, Claire. And it is a timely reminder, because we don't want the same pantomime in Dalbeattie or anywhere else that we've had it at Wallace Hall.
Rob?
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, just going back to, where are we, 3.9 and 3.10. I get what you're saying about suitability and sufficiency being a bit tricky, because what's suitable and sufficient to one person might be absolutely abysmal substandard to somebody else. It's a bit like planning. It ends up being a matter of opinion all too often. But what I was trying to get my head around is recognising in 3.10, we're saying that the key drivers of wind and watertight and safe and secure are going to be the primary considerations. How are we then going to weight suitability and sufficiency, or to what extent are we going to continue feeding them into the process? Because the narrative says that they'll kind of still be in there, but I wasn't really sure how they would continue to work in the new kind of method of ranking and prioritising.
Very valid point you raise. What we've tried to convey is to say that we have a set amount of funding. We need to look at focusing that funding to address a lot of the issues that you raise as elected members, that the teachers raised to us, and how can that money best be invested to support the school estate. What we're saying is that the priorities are around the condition of the buildings, but also accessibility, but that everything that we're investing in, whether it be our projects, our PPP, our schools asset class, we must always look about suitability and functionality and sustainability, and they should be givens in terms of whatever project or proposal we put, or whether programme it is, must always actually have these hooks integral to what they're doing, so they shouldn't be bolt-on, add-on considerations.
Thanks, Jim. A quick follow-up. It may be that the easiest way for us to see this working through is when we see the next report. Will we be able, in the way that you present it and the data you provide, to see, it's not before and after, strictly speaking, but to see how the new considerations have actually informed any changes in the priority? Because if we just get the list, we could go back and look at the previous list, but we'd always be kind of guessing a bit as to work out just what considerations had shifted properties either up or down.
Absolutely, and I think your point is absolutely right. I think once it's illustrated and populated with the schools, then it'll be able to be much easier understood. And I actually take your point on board. We'll make sure that the paper is drafted in a way that really pulls out these key points and concerns you've raised.
Thanks, Chair. Just in reference to page 109, the energy rating consideration and the prioritisation. I'm assuming this correlates with the template on page 42 under the capital investment strategy. When the report comes back on that, I think it's important because if you relate it to the section in the middle of the page, in page 41, it suggests that there's of the 64,318 tonnes of carbon emissions, the school accounts for about just under a quarter of that. I think what's important to see is how that relates to the last few years. I think since the programme of work started on the school estate. So if we could even see, say for instance, probably ideally the last 10 years, probably even the last 5, and again in relation to the council estate as a whole. The other thing we're keen to see, because this is not just about the prioritisation, there are major budget savings over the next few years in a lot of these, and I think the last few budgets have mentioned the importance of efficiency of energy and our buildings. What's suggested in here on page 41 doesn't include things like photovoltaics, which were rolled out in a considerable way. And I'm a little bit concerned about the fact that a good deal of our replacements are planned around a biomass solution. Given, and I've raised this on a number of occasions, given the experience of the 3 that we've put in over the last few years, I'm still concerned that we don't have the expertise in this council to know what we're being sold by whoever it is that's putting these biomass boilers in. I know of one there where it's probably costing us a considerable amount more in energy, and it's important for the council to have somebody there who knows how biomass works, and we're not getting sold a pup. I'm concerned about the fact that they are ideal in small residential units. I'm not convinced, and some of the people I speak to know a bit more than I do, about whether this is in fact actually ideal for commercial usage. But it certainly smacks to me that we really need, if we're going down this route, we need somebody in this council who knows how these things work and that we've been sold appropriately. But I would expect any of these sort of things to be included in the prioritisation so that we know exactly what we're talking about and how successful we've so far been with our school estates, because that's where the biggest roofage, for example, for photovoltaics is, and some mention of that in there. It's not just all about biomass and what is it, underfloor heating. Okay, thanks.
I think there's probably 3 items in there from what you said. Firstly, about the carbon emissions, absolutely noted, and we'll engage with our sustainability colleagues to get what data we can in relation to that. In relation to the biomass aspect, we've heard about concerns with members, and we actually take them on board. There's been a lot of lessons learned and review, both within Dumfries and Galloway, but across Scotland, about biomass, how they're designed, how they're installed, how they're working. And I think that gives us reassurance that there's some fundamental items that need to get addressed from our experience, which will make it work effectively. We are engaging with a very effective biomass supplier, particularly for Dalbeattie. And if you or any elected member wants to be part of those discussions to gain understanding, knowledge and reassurance, that invitation is absolutely open. It gives you that sense of clarity, which might address some of your concerns and fears that you've raised. And in relation to your last point about integration, as I mentioned at the start, it's fundamental that everything we do should be with a sustainability focus. What I would say, and I raised at the last Education Committee, is working closely with Chris Woodgee in Sustainability and Property Architectural Services. There is a separate programme which has got a separate funding mechanism, which is really focusing on the installation of PVs and all these appropriate sustainable devices, because a revolving loan fund. I actually touched base with Chris before I came into this meeting, so we're going to catch up soon to really start focusing and getting a programme so that you can see what's happening and have an opportunity to comment and a bit of timeline to do that as well.
Thanks for that. And that last point, I mean, that raises an issue which was discussed during budgetary considerations, not just this budget, but before. And it probably involves, again, looking at an integration or a restructuring of the asset management planning unit, which includes the carbon reduction and sustainable energy, who, as far as my understanding went during those discussions, that they're too far removed from the corporate centre and the asset management planning, which should fundamentally include the school's estate. But I think that's something that we've asked to be looked at, and it's a restructuring issue, if you like. It's not just about how effective are our carbon reduction people currently operating. If the structure's not there to ensure that there's proper dialogue between all aspects of the council estate, then it's not going to get rolled off. And I'm very concerned, as group's concerned, about the speed at which the energy efficiencies almost appears to have stalled since the programme of PVs was rolled out a couple of budgets ago.
Gail?
Thank you, Chair. Two issues on the back of Councillor Dempster's concerns. I do wonder where elected members sit in respect of scrutiny of the PPP contracts at the moment. Certainly we've had a couple of local issues which I'll take up with the Outwith Committee in relation to some changes in the schools. And to put it frankly, I think we're being robbed blind at times. And when there are issues, there are big issues, and it adds additional cost to the school's budgets. And I just wonder as members where we sit in that scrutiny role. The other one is the one that nobody ever wants to mention, but with tightening budgets, where do we sit with schools with very few pupils in them? Have we any movement with that yet?
Chair, I'll pick up on both of those and then maybe ask Claire to expand a wee bit. On the first matter about scrutiny, we did bring a paper to members fairly recently on PPP. However, I myself and Claire sat through a very helpful session with Scottish Futures Trust last week about trying to make sure that we get very best value from our contracts, and there will certainly be a piece of work done over the next period of time. I think it would be the appropriate thing to bring then a further report to committee to give you information on progress there, which would allow you to scrutinise how that progress goes. Secondly, we are clear that we have a number of small schools which may not be offering the best environment in terms of education for youngsters. I think it is time to re-examine those issues, and maybe Claire can say a little bit more about that.
Absolutely, and noted on the PPP aspect, and we'll report on the progress of the work at Future Committee. With respect to the small schools agenda, we have done a review of small schools, particularly below 10 in terms of number, and we have started to engage with the head teachers and local parents and local elected members on those specific schools in those specific areas. As you can imagine, that is quite sensitive, and we're doing that very empathetically and supportive in terms of the parents' concerns and any specific concerns of children. We will look to bring a paper to March on the first tranche of that we're looking at. As with the approach that we've taken for Dumfries Learning Town, we do a lot of pre-engagement consultation work with a small c to engage views, opinions, to see if there's anything we're missing, to make sure that we're well informed and we've got all the data and robust evidence to make sure that when we come to you as elected members formally, that we've got the information you're looking for in order that you can make an informed decision.
Right, I've got Ian Crothers, Jim McComb and Colin Wiper. So Ian?
Thanks, Chairman. It's in regards to 3.6. This is a fellow member asked me to bring this up. 3.6 outlines the condition of the buildings ranking them from A to D, and Hot Sprig is what was asked to be bring up in particular. Just where does that fit in here, and will we see that in the next report that's coming back and see it prioritised pretty near the top, I would imagine, just to get an update on that, please.
Hotsbridge is on our immediate horizon. We know there's a pressing issue there, so a more detailed site investigation came in of that today, which will inform Lauren and the team in terms of decision making. But just to advise that is a priority item, and probably to reinforce the point Councillor Davison made, our utmost priority is about safety and security, and if anything pressing comes on our horizon, it's dealt with immediately and it's accelerated, regardless of any other parameters, and that's a key one for us just now.
As I said at the start, there was another paper coming to the March Committee which has a sort of breakdown school by school in terms of the various conditions. Jim?
Thanks, Chair. I'm just a wee bit concerned that by changing the criteria, there may be schools which rate high on the current priority list, but they will be disadvantaged by the change in the criteria. I assume the table which appears there at 3.6 is based upon the existing criteria, and that the information we're going to get in March will be based upon the revised criteria.
Okay.
So the table that's there shows the existing, so the previous and the current conditions, so it shows both in terms of comparison. We are undertaking analysis at the moment about what that means to the schools in reality. So as part of this paper coming forward, you'll see the old prioritisation, new prioritisation, but we'll put some narrative around any movement, particularly anybody that has reduced in terms of their prioritisation list, and give explanation around that. But it is an exercise that will be undertaken prior to come to committee to look at it and understand it in more detail and look at specific schools. Because obviously we don't, as far as possible, we don't want to make sure that anybody's disadvantaged of this. It's meant to be a proactive, positive approach to prioritisation of school estate management.
So the information we are presented with will include both the old and the new prioritisation.
We will have to give a narrative to explain the movement and where things have come from.
And Colin.
Thank you, Chair. It's going back to the subject of biomass. We installed a boiler at the swimming pool nearly 4 years ago, and to say we've had problems would be an understatement. So I have a fair amount of experience, both in the mechanical side of it and recording heat outputs and comparing them against gas and prices and kilowatt hours, etc. I just wondered, I don't know the answer to this, is obviously why I'm asking the question. Does the council qualify for RHI?
The sites can, yes.
Because, I mean, if there's...
Just for clarification, what's RHI?
It's not my area of expertise, but...
Renewable heat incentive.
So it gives subsidies in terms of if you do install a biomass, that particular site gets subsidies in terms of the heat production, so it can be quite financially beneficial.
I don't know what the rates are now, but we qualified 4 years ago, but it is extremely financially beneficial. I think the rates have probably come down, but that is the only thing in its favour, to my mind, because it's the difference between gas and biomass is negligible. In fact, gas is probably cheaper now with the rates coming down. But if that site qualifies for RHI, then it's an absolute no-brainer to put a biomass in. And I'd be quite happy to get involved in future if there's discussions, because as I say, I do have quite a bit of experience of it.
Peter?
Can I just pick up on what Colin was saying there? And could we maybe have a paper back to us explaining how the finance is arranged on the biomass boilers? Because and whether we're actually investing in the infrastructure and receiving the RHI, or is another company investing in it and charging us for the heat and we're not getting the RHI? Could we maybe have an analysis of how it's all working, please?
Absolutely. I know Chris Woodgie's done that for other committees, so we can ask him to present it to this committee.
To the recommendations. Members are asked to 2.1 note the summary information from the 2014 condition surveys of the school estates provided in paragraph 3.6. Noted. 2.2 agree to the revised prioritisation criteria as described in paragraph 3.9. And 2.3 agree to a paper being presented to Education Committee in March which provides detailed on the revised prioritisation order. Peter?
And could we add 2.4, something to do with the biomass report?
What do you agree a future report on biomass? Put in the discussion. Okay. So are we now in a position to go back to the long enough. Okay, we can just have a break for a couple of minutes and then come back.
Members, while we're just hoping to sort this out, I wonder if I could ask your agreement to something. As well as Audit Scotland being here today, you may have noticed colleagues from Education Scotland, or HMIE, they are beginning engagement with the Education Department over the next 3 or 4 days. That formal engagement begins in 10 minutes with a formal presentation from me at Woodbank. Given that's 10 minutes away, I wonder if you would mind me leaving Claire Renton to deputise as Director for the last item, and me heading over to Woodbank. Is that okay? Thank you.
Peter?
Just a very quick one, not an education matter, but could we maybe have the arrangements on the lectern altered in future so we can actually see the person that's presenting?
Okay, better get a move on while we're winning. So if we could start item 9, the Dumfries Learning Town project update.
Just to say, Chair, I've got nothing to add to the paper other than to give the presentation, if that's okay with you and elected members. Again, apologies again about the software issues. We will get this resolved because we were responding to elected members requesting for the modelling and for the 3D aspect, and we're very pleased with ourselves that we've managed to do it. Obviously not very pleased that we've not managed to get the technology to support us. So we'll get this resolved for the next committee, but also to say it is working on our computers and laptops. So if anybody would like to stay back and have a look at any of the modelling, you're very welcome. And to say that all these images will be shared with stakeholders at an engagement session down at Dalbeattie later on this week. But what we felt it was really important that we wanted to engage with elected members first. What we want to do today is to give you an overview of the journey to create and develop this campus, and specifically give you an insight into in terms of how this has been positioned and why it's been positioned and how it responds to the educational brief. So, for those of you that are not familiar with the site, and I don't want to assume that you all are, this is the western edge of Dalbeattie. This road to the bottom of the screen is the road out to the west towards Castle Douglas. And this road up here is the site to the existing high school site, and this blue outprint here is the existing high school site. So effectively we are purchasing this area of land here, which is still in green, and we're going to be developing on the existing sports pitches and the adjacent land. Now, the whole point of this development was to co-locate the primary school and the high school together to create a proper 2-to-18 campus arrangement. So to create innovative, effective, smooth, seamless learning from 2-to-18. The layout of the building is as close to the existing town as possible to extend the urbanisation of Dalbeattie. It is in a cross design, that's a very crude way of putting it, with a centre atrium, which I'll give you some diagrams on, with spokes. The whole point of that aspect is to create very narrow plans, to get natural daylight in and to get natural ventilation. This is a big thing about teachers, users, parents, about children not getting enough oxygen. There's big studies to demonstrate the level of inactivity in the afternoons, but also about promoting sustainability through reduced mechanical and electrical ventilation. We have got our grass pitch here with a running track. We've had to move it over to the left-hand side of the site because this area in brown here has been a major area for us in terms of marshy and boggy, and it's not great to build on. But it could be used very effectively as an educational environment, and the primary school are particularly keen about that in terms of engaging their children and utilising their natural outdoor facilities. We've got our 3G pitch up here. And just to say, we're working closely with leisure and sport and all this to make sure we get the right specification and right arrangement. We've got the car parking to the front. And again, with a lot of experiences we're learning for our schools, we're looking at that very closely to say, how do we separate commercial vehicles, bus, pickups, staff parking, but make it effective as well? And then looking at all the areas around that school development is how we create effective learning. So working with the schools and the users very closely about doing rural skills, about outdoor learning environments, about amphitheatres, but also very importantly is about making our children safe and secure, and about giving key nursery environments, primary environments and secondary environments that can be brought together but also divided apart. And that's just a more detailed footprint of what we're doing. Again, we can send out plans to this, so we can email these images out to everybody. We're also constrained by services, so we've got 2 HV cables going across here, and we're currently negotiating with Scottish Power about getting them rerouted underground. We've also got an 11 kVA cable here, and we've got 2 culverts here, which means we can't bring the building further over to the east anymore without incurring lots of extra costs. So there's a lot of reasons why this building's positioned the way it is. We've also looked at the north-south access in terms of the rotation of the sun as well. So there's lots of drivers for this. This has been well thought out. Generally looking at the plan of the building, and again, I've got some more detailed, more interesting images, but just very crudely, you're looking at a main entrance here. This is the early years provision here. And what we've done is we've got a single main entrance, but we've also got separate entrances. So the school can operate as one, or the school can operate in terms of the stage of education as well. So we're looking at the 2 to 18 arrangement there, really challenging how we do this. We're looking at primary 1 here to really have a proper early years, working with the transition between the nursery and primary 1. We've got a dedicated games hall here with stage for the primary. So again, it's very focused, really sort of increased aspect around performance, drama, bringing confidence to young children. And then bringing the rest of the, that's not good. We're getting there. Do you want me to reboot it again and talk quickly? Reboot again. I wonder what it is.
It may well be good if Google Chrome cached it. I think the Google Chrome affected the system, in which case
So it is rebooted it?
they'll have to contact Scotia.
She was doing that already.
Yeah, but they'll have to not do this as well.
I am going to be focused in my discussion going forward, just in case the timeline cuts out again. Right, okay, so the rest of the primary is coming down here. So again, big focus about breakout areas, also about each classroom being able to access the outside. Big central hub space with lots of social, catering. We've got the kitchens nearby, we've got home economics nearby in terms of the secondary. We've got an automotive workshop down here, and then going into language labs and science areas. This is up here is the community wing. Again, we're working closely with leisure and sport to have a big games hall. We've got a fitness studio, we've got a dance studio, and looking at changing facilities. So that area can operate out with core times as a separate community facility. Going upstairs, we've got the management admin suite. We've also put in areas for hot desking and visiting services to try and encourage other public sector and private sector partners to come in and operate there. We're looking at the primary, so looking at the upper years of primary going upstairs, but again, giving them direct access to the outstairs, because Dalbeattie Primary School do make a lot of use of outdoor education. We've got a nurturing centre. We're also looking at breakout pods throughout the school, so if children do need one-to-one support or need to get taken out of mainstream, there's a quick and easy access to do that. And we've also got a learning resource centre. And then we've got the balance of the secondary accommodation up here. So you've got, we're looking at taking away names and subjects over doors, so looking at rooms that could be used for English, for maths, and have a flexibility of purpose and function. Probably the nicer bit is looking at the visual images. This is the image that we've modelled in terms of what the central atrium space will look like. So it could be used for catering and eating at lunchtime, but equally it could be used for arts, drama, performance, not only for the schools, but also for community and visiting production facilities. As you can see, lots of natural daylight coming in. Again, lots of flexible social space. That's a big thing for my users, about somewhere to go to hang out with their mates. This is the nursery early years space. So again, working closely with our estates team and early learning years colleagues about how we perform and populate this space, really responding to the early years policies and the new government agenda of 2 and upwards. So really challenging that and creating, a lot of this is to do with the fit out. It's about how creatively you fit out and use the internal aspects. But again, learners, staff, schools are very heavily involved in this. This is down one of the learning corridors. So looking at learning bases here, but having lots of flexible learning environments. So in line with Curriculum for Excellence, if children want to learn individually, collectively, doing project work, is giving them the space and flexibility, and also the teachers to do that as well, but also the visibility by having class partitions. So there's that line of sight, a big importance in terms of safety and security of all of our children and policing our schools. So again, the schools have been heavily involved in developing and shaping all this. Again, looking at natural light, getting ventilation in, looking at very sustainability in terms of keeping it simple. And this is down a learning corridor for the secondary element. So trying to create some purpose and identity and personality to these spaces. So we're starting to look at the mock-up sample rooms. They should be ready for the end of the month, end of February, and about doing reiterations of that. Because we know fine well the first time we won't get the learning teaching models right, we won't get the furniture right. But the whole point of doing these mock-ups early is to get feedback, get users using them, to see what is actually going to work. And this is the externals. Again, keeping it very simple, spending the money in the internals where the user's going to get the benefit, but also being respectful that this is a rural setting against Dalbeattie, which is a small, low urban environment. So you don't want to create some monstrosity which actually doesn't respond and respect the residential area it's sitting beside. So looking at brick, looking at a slate roof wraparound, but keeping it low profile, and keeping outdoor areas dynamic and integrated, and getting the children to really design and have an input into it. Now, this is some of the models we just took pictures of what I was hoping to show you in terms of fly-throughs. So what's happening now is we're building all the electronic modelling around it, which is called BIM modelling, and that brings the architectural, the engineering, the mechanical, electrical together and puts it together so you can look for efficiencies or clashes, but it helps illustrate the design. So these are the actual construction drawings getting modelled into reality. As I say, I was hoping to use this and give you a fly-through, but it gives you a little bit more level of detail and demonstrates that work is progressing on this. I'm not going to go any further for fear of crashing the system because we've got the 3D modelling, but as I say, we've got it in this computer. If anybody's got the time and is interested about staying on, we'll certainly run these models after this, and we will work and get this software issue sorted out. So future, because I want to use this as a tool to communicate and show you at future committee meetings, both for Dalbeattie and Dumfries, about how this is going to look and feel. And this is certainly going to be very key for our user engagement. So learners, teachers, parents, communities will see all this too. Because as I said at the very start, one of the measures of success for this is for any user to go into this building and be familiar with it from day one, because they've been that involved with it, they know it, they understand it. So still want to keep very true to that commitment. I will stop there.
Thank you, Claire. Members? Gail?
Thank you, Claire. 2 brief points, and it's probably because we've learned our lessons from the PPP constructions and the consultation in relation to that. I'll let you sit down first. Within the school, particularly the secondary school, is there going to be a dedicated staff room? Because I know that in our current PPP schools, there's an element of feeling that the small departmental staff rooms have each department sitting in their own silos and they're not sort of interconnecting with the rest of the school. The other issue that has been raised at quite a few of the schools that I've spoken to was a dedicated study area / common room for the 5th, 6th year pupils. I think they feel a wee bit sort of disenfranchised in the newer schools. They don't have a dedicated area, they don't have a quiet space to study, and they don't have a quiet space to put their stuff in and feel as if they've got a bit of ownership. And they end up scrabbling around the school trying to find an empty classroom for study periods. So it's just that element of trying to, give the pupils what they require as well as the staff what they require, and what have you put into the design for that?
Yep, certainly two very important points. The staff base is really interesting because every school has a different opinion on this about the bases or the collective. But Dalbeattie to be very clear that they were keen for a staff room. So there is a central staff point there, and also bases out with that they can use. In terms of the sixth form room, that has been something that's really come onto our agenda recently. Really seeing a lot of that in the pilot schools, and there's a number of ways that different schools have dealt with that. But absolutely seeing that importance of giving the 6 years that sense of placement, importance, particularly in terms of their onward transition into whatever positive destination is right for them. So we're working on the right solution for Dalbeattie with that one.
Davy?
5, you're hoping to put it to planning in February, but then you go over to 3.11, you're hoping Stage 2 submission will be delivered to the council, and it is anticipated, well I don't like seeing the word anticipated because we've had a wee kind of knockback with the floodplains issue. Is this timeline for February to planning, will it be achievable at present? Because I know we've had to put it back a year because of the flooding situation at the high school playing fields like. I'm just a wee bit kind of worried about 311 about May 2015, anticipated it will start late summer, the build.
So we have a full master programme that we're working to and monitoring. The planning application has been submitted, so that's out with our hands now. We're expecting it to be considered at February committee, but really have to respect the planning departments. It's in their hands now. In terms of the construction programme, we are working to a late summer start, so September, and we're currently on programme. What we do is monitor that on a fortnightly basis, and Frank interrogates that in a great detail in terms of giving us reassurance, and would give future updates to committees. So if there's any programme slippage, we would let elected members know.
Cheers.
Peter?
Thank you. Danny, you mentioned briefly something about the mechanic shop. I was just wondering what other vocational facilities that might be included in this.
So the key 3 subject offerings that Dalbeattie are going to be offering, and just to bear in mind that will be available for all statutory schools, is automotive, rural skills and hospitality, the 3 key areas. They will have access to construction trades at Castle Douglas and health and beauty at Castle Douglas, and equally Castle Douglas students will have access to the vocational skills at Dalbeattie. So they're looking at sharing resources because none of the schools have the individual numbers to have the critical mass to deliver it alone.
Rob?
Thanks, Chairman. What's the engagement session this week? The community, you mentioned it, that presentation, or I think we maybe missed that one, or I've not noticed it.
I'll check with our project manager who's not able to hear today because she's doing some work. I think they're just doing it internally to the school project sponsors to start off with to gauge their opinion, and then that'll get rolled to the stakeholders.
Ian?
Rob just asked my question.
Dick?
Yeah, it all looks very impressive. There's a lot of work going into making that a very good design and layout, covering all bases as far as I can see. Just one concern, perhaps, there's lots of light there, but still it looks a bit clinical, cold, perhaps. I think working there or being a child, lots of glass. I'm talking about metaphorically cold. Yeah. So what what the aspects you doing to make it a place where children feel comfortable and cosy, good learning environment? What are you doing to do that?
Thank you. I think that the challenging with all computer images is it can look a little bit clinical and a little bit industrial. So it's probably that's probably giving you that sense. I am absolutely confident when you've got 800 children in there, that will bring this building to life. And really, that's what the focus has got to be. And we're trying to make sure we've got a design which doesn't become the focus. It's actually about the children and learners, as you say. There is, we've got two companies. We've got a space solutions company, which looks about how the environments are used, how the existing environments are used, what could be brought across in terms of furniture and fixtures, and then work with the users to say, what would you like in your new environment? There's also an interior design consultant who specialises in these areas to really understand it's everything from the colours, the carpet, the sounds, the signage. All of that is really important and key. How you engage people in learning resource centres, about how you do the shelving. So we know the ergonomics of this is absolutely key to successful delivery. We're confident we've got a good team on board through the Tier 1 contractor who are listening, who are taking it on board. And I think the very fact that we've had such close user engagement, having the children and young adults and young people say exactly what they want really gives that definition and personality. And it's also about, there's lots of good ideas about how they can get engaged as well. So why can't they do a yarn bombing experiment whereby they knit the acoustic panels for the ceilings? We're looking at lights that have projections of people's family history within Dalbeattie to give that sense of ownership and that making it theirs and personalising it. So there's lots of ideas and thoughts which we're working with the schools on.
Graham.
Thanks, Chair. Claire, you mentioned in your presentation mock-ups of classrooms. Where is this being done and who's allowed to see it? And is it for elected members or is it for parents or children? Or, give us a bit more information on that, please.
Yeah, the sample room is scheduled to be created at the high school and should be available to view from the 26th, and it's open to all parties to come along and see. You've got an idea of what the learning wall looks like, the furniture, that type of thing. So it's open to all parties and it will be available from the 26th. Correct. February.
Perhaps it might be worthwhile sending an email out to that, just to remind people that that's what we're talking about in terms of timescales. John?
It's just a quick one there. I think we stated before that the anticipated start date's got to be the summer of this year. I just noticed on social media, it was either social media or somewhere yesterday, that a Scottish Government spokesperson said it was going to start in spring.
Can't comment on others.
I've got nobody else waiting to speak, so if we can move to the recommendations. Well, we've already received the presentation on Dalbeattie Learning Campus eventually. And 2.2, agree the Dalbeattie Learning Campus project meets the educational brief as agreed by Education Committee on the 11th of September 2012. Happy with that? Just in terms of the laptop presentations, I realise that the lure of the council buffet next door, which is obviously going to be like flies around a whatever. Do you want to take the laptops in next door, then people can actually come along and see them whilst they grab something to eat at the same time? Yeah?
Yeah, I'm happy to do it.
Well, I mean, it's available there, so if you want to just go in there and set up, then... all right. I've got no other business. Okay, thank you.
Paul Garrett,